Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about The Eighth Night. The Eighth Night is a Korean mystery thriller with horror elements that tells the story of two characters who are fated to meet and work together in order to save the world from evil spirits. The movie goes into detail about these spirits at the beginning through a series of animated sequences, and talks about these eyes that belong to one particular spirit, one of them being black and the other being red, and how they both have unimaginable power when they're both combined together. Thankfully, however, the Enlightened One, aka the Buddha, is able to separate these eyeballs from the spirit, who then places them in these Sarira caskets that are then hidden in different parts of the world in the hopes that they will never be found and reunited again. But as you could expect from a movie like this, one of the caskets which has the red eye in it is eventually discovered by an archaeologist who goes insane after being in its presence for so long, and he proceeds to commit a ritual on the night of a blood moon which resurrects the red eye spirit, and it proceeds to go on a murderous rampage, possessing and killing its hosts during an 8-day period, after which its full powers will be brought back, and it's up to the heroes of the story to break that cycle by killing one of its potential victims before the 8th night eventually occurs. So there's a lot of variables and moving parts at play with this movie's story. It moves at a pretty slow pace, and it's not easy to keep track of everything that's happening all the time throughout, but fortunately the protagonists are likable and memorable enough that they help the audience to stay invested throughout their journey. The first protagonist, Chong-suk, is a monk undergoing a vow of silence, at least at the beginning of the movie anyway. He doesn't hold on to that vow for very long, and he happens to work at the same monastery that's guarding the casket that has the black eye in it. Chong-suk is ordered by his dying master to go and locate a man named Shang-hua, who's a retired exorcist and has a lot more knowledge on how to deal with evil spirits compared to the average person. And it was interesting to see how Chong-suk changed over the course of the movie, from being a monk that was fully dedicated to his craft to not being quite so dedicated by the end of it, as he starts to get exposed to everyday elements that normal people like myself often take for granted. He does his best to hold on to certain traditions like bowing and praying before eating a meal, but occasionally temptation gets the better of him, like when he outwardly expresses extreme joy at getting a new pair of shoes, and occasionally sneaking a glance at a pretty woman that he fancies, which always raises the ire of Shang-hua whenever he notices. Despite his innocence and naivete often getting him into trouble throughout the story, we never really hold it against him because he's used to a completely different world than we are, and as he starts to experience this different world more often, he develops a newfound set of beliefs that he feels is true to himself, which raises his determination in seeing his master's wishes through to the end. Shang-hua, the second protagonist, is basically the polar opposite of Chong-suk, in that he used to be a monk, but fled the monastery and no longer practices his beliefs due to experiencing a trauma several years prior to this movie's events. He suffers from the loss of his family, who were killed due to a car accident, and due to this he feels that no amount of belief on his part will do anything to erase the pain that he experiences every day. However, it's thanks to the call to action that's brought to him by Chong-suk that he eventually realizes he has a newfound purpose in life that will hopefully bring him a shot at redemption, and maybe, just maybe, will reunite him with his family once more. I really like the parallels that this movie had going between Chong-suk and Shang-hua. They both basically start at polar opposites, and then by the end of the movie they end up at each other's previous positions that they had at the beginning of the story, and their transformations throughout felt both natural and believable. As I mentioned at the beginning of this review, the story moves at a pretty sluggish pace, though I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of details to unpack throughout, and it all has this great slow burn aspect to the whole thing, despite the lack of scares that you might come to expect for this sort of movie. It plays out like a classic detective mystery movie, in that characters are always going from one place to another looking for clues in order to complete their objectives. There are some jump scares along the way that help mix things up a little bit, but for the most part it plays out like a thriller rather than a straight up horror movie, which gives it a unique presentation, and that's something that I really appreciate. The police officers added an extra level of suspense to the story as well. They're busy conducting their own little investigation as to why there's so many dead bodies starting to show up all of a sudden, which are the bodies of the victims that the spirit has claimed, and they all seem to end up in the same state of decomposition one after the next. Their investigation inevitably conflicts with that of Shang-hua and Chong-suk's, and it was great to see the stakes raised over the course of the story as this played out on camera. As for the spirit itself, it's portrayed in a very interesting way. It's not really anything you haven't seen before before like in other thriller or horror movies in the past, but it still maintains a threatening presence on screen, and the special effects and makeup that were used to enhance the spirit on screen were very well done. It almost seemed like it was getting more evil and demented as it claimed more and more stepping stones on its way to the eighth night, almost like it was changing alongside with the protagonist too. It just seemed to get more clever and cunning as events played out, which again raised the stakes and the tension of the story, which made it all the more thrilling. The only thing I didn't like about the spirit in this movie, and this is more of a nitpick than anything, is that we don't really see what happens with the process of how it changes from one body to the next. It always smash cuts at the last possible second when a possession is about to take place, and every time it happened I was like, oh come on, can't we see more? Although I'm being sarcastic when I say that, there are some legitimate problems that I do have with this movie's presentation, in that the movie's story, while very interesting, can be pretty confusing to follow at times. The movie's story takes place across 8 days and 8 nights, but most of the interesting things that do happen in the story take place between days 6 to 8, whereas days 1 to 5 are much shorter by comparison and don't have anywhere near as much in the way of interesting things that do happen. This is probably why the movie seems so slow to me in the beginning. I think the movie would have fared much better if it spread all the interesting things that do happen in it more evenly across all 8 days rather than saving them for the last third of the movie and have it be such a slog at the beginning and even in parts of the middle of it. Also, and there might be a detail I missed in the movie that explains this, but I have no idea at all what happened with the last stepping stone in this movie. The movie throws a huge curveball related to the stepping stone in the last half hour or so, which absolutely threw me for a loop, and even now as of making this review, I still have no idea what happened. I'm generally not a fan of when movies throw a plot twist my way, especially when it's done in the last 20 to 30 minutes of a story. It just feels cheap, and it gives the audience little time to react and adjust to just what the heck happened on screen, while the characters in the story itself are just carrying on like nothing happened. But overall, despite those little things bothering me here and there, The Eighth Night proved to be a very solid thriller story. If you like thrillers that have a supernatural side to them and you don't mind slow, plotting narratives, I think that this movie would definitely be for you. It took a while for the movie to sink its fangs into me, but once it did, I was hooked, and the way the protagonist progressed and transformed over the course of the story made it that much more enjoyable for me. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of The Eighth Night. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the video game action anime, Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. Bye bye!